totalitarianism in Germany in the 1930s, the dogma and the absolute certainty, and he contrasted that with the great tradition of science in Germany and Werner Heisenberg and uncertainty. And he showed how those two, or suggested that those two cultures were absolutely parallel and never touched each other. So don't you think that all this that's happening, all this Twitter sphere and everything, it's exactly the same and that nothing really has changed?
Oh, I completely agree, and I think that the idea of having a golden age is that we, at the moment, are unfettered. And so I say golden age with a twinge of pewter, I suppose, with recognizing that we must understand and recognize that the freedoms that we experience right now must be fettered by the understanding that we have of what, not only what science has understood and ethics committees around the world have understood, but also what is going on politically, as you suggest, totalitarianism, what is going on socially. I think I completely agree that the golden age needs to be understood, that in fact it could be more destructive to individuals if we don't take into consideration those other things.
Hi. How do you protect the identity of online, of folk online who say use pseudonyms and talk about all manner of stuff, and you want to quote them or you want to talk about what they're doing, but you know that if you actually do use the whole quote, anyone can actually find them?
Yeah, and that's a fascinating element of the archiving potential of the web. Well, first of all, I think more than anything else, there's a variety of things that you can consider. Amy Bruckman has got a really good, it's from 2002 actually, she's got a good kind of checklist that looks at, you know, the anonymity element. It looks at whether an environment is public or is private, whether the individual has granted his or her consent. I mean, these are all very standard ethics elements that we somehow haven't really been able to universally apply to these environments. I mean, first and foremost, we do have to recognize and have to consider, well, certainly don't use the individual pseudonym. That's pretty straightforward. Use a completely different pseudonym, a pseudonym, you know, a trans pseudonym, I suppose. And then again, you have to think, all right, is this environment public? Does the individual understand what public means in an internet environment? You know, I have regular discussions with my editor at The Guardian who will take things from Twitter and without asking, will put them into articles. And because you know, they argue that, well, it's a public forum. But I would say that actually there is that problem that people don't necessarily recognize that you can do searches and all that kind of thing. So there's a privacy element. And then third, you have to consider if it is a public or a private environment, has that changed? Has it gone behind a password wall? Has it, you know, what is the nature of the environment? So I think that certainly those are like at least three barriers or three hoops that you can jump through in order to protect that individual. But the consent aspect is, I think, quite important.
Could I ask a question on the way? So some of the studies that we've done on information behaviour studies in organisations like RIN, the Research Information Network, we'll hear from later in the day, have seen a separation in people's minds and behaviours between how they use social, particularly social functions on the internet, in terms of separation of private and work, personal and work, and how, you know, social spaces, the greying of what is part of your work and what is part of your private. Have you got any thoughts on that in terms of psychology around use?
Well, more on social flocking. I think that as people's social networks, for example, they start to cross over. As soon as my uncle starts putting pictures of me at Christmas on Facebook, you know, we're still going to be friends on Facebook, but I'm going to start using another social network that is more private. And commercially, we've seen more and more social networks build very specific remits. And you know, Facebook has tried to stay in that by having groups and private accounts and this and that and the other. Yeah, so you see that certainly in terms of behaviour, in terms of flocking, for sure. No, who was it? It was Zuckerberg who was saying, yeah, it was Mark Zuckerberg who was saying he thought that in the future we were all going to have an online identity that, you know, did not differentiate between the work and the private. In fact, it was all going to be one happy you know, spectrum of me. He is not yet 30. Apologies for those in the audience who are yet 30. And I think that's awesome. So, you know, we can learn potentially what different populations will view as